Hi everyone, I'm Ruth Wasserman Lande. Today is December 8th, 2024. This is the live daily briefing of the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office. We're live on Instagram, X, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and available afterwards wherever you get your podcasts. Please start submitting questions in the chat, and as always, like and subscribe to help us reach a wider audience. Syria's Assad regime partnered with Iran and Hezbollah to try and destroy Israel. Assad's fall means Iran and Hezbollah are even weaker than after the Israeli retaliation against the Hezbollah's aggression. Now is the time to press the advantage against Iran's genocidal threats. You see, if we break it down, Assad allowed Iran's missiles to be delivered via his territory for Hezbollah to fire at Israel from Lebanon. Assad hosted Iran's Shiite militias in Syria. They also attacked Israel. Assad's downfall means it's far more difficult for Hezbollah to rearm. It also means Iran's Shiite militias mostly fled and will continue to flee. Assad's downfall means less Iranian missiles aimed at Israelis from Lebanon and from Syria. The Islamic Republic of Iran's proxies are, in fact, crumbling. Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Assad in Syria. Iran's air defenses were also taken out by the IDF. With its back against the wall, the Islamic Republic of Iran will be racing towards becoming a nuclear power in order to return its deterrence and achieve its genocidal ambitions against Israel and the West. Remember, it has nothing to do with rational thinking or realpolitik, but rather with an Islamist Shiite ideology which calls for the establishment of a Sharia-based worldwide caliphate in which all other religions will be banned. Western leaders must take advantage of this opportunity to blunt Iran's genocidal threat to Israel, the region and the world. So now, what do you think will happen next in Syria? An Iran-backed Syria with genocidal Assad at the helm was dangerous for Israel. A Turkey-backed Syria can also be dangerous for Israel and the region. While the current Sunni militias say they want a Syria free for all its citizens, including minorities, but many of Syria's rebels are backed by Turkey. Now remember, in the summer of 2024, Erdogan called for the destruction of the state of Israel. The world must listen. Turkey's President Erdogan is a disciple of the Muslim Brotherhood. It can also be destabilizing for the region in general, including for Egypt, Jordan, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and more. They all see the Muslim Brotherhood as a threat. Erdogan is also competing for leadership of Sunni Islam. Erdogan is joined with super wealthy Qatar in supporting Muslim Brotherhood ideology. Remember that Erdogan is also a NATO member with a very strong military. Qatar broadcasts Islamist ideology on its state TV, Al Jazeera, and has all the funding which Turkey lacks. Both Qatar and Erdogan's Turkey host Hamas leadership together. Now, let's take some questions from our audience watching live on social media.
Thank you, Ruth. Our first question comes from Katie on Instagram. What is actually happening on Israel's border with Syria?
Well, as I said, the rebels are not one of a kind. They're all different kinds of rebels grouped together against the Assad regime. Those that are closest to Israel's border seem to be more leaning towards the Free Syria rebels. There are some Druze also closest to the border. These are the kind of groups that are closest to the Israeli border, but not necessarily all of them. Israel is making sure that no one actually exceeds the internationally recognized line that cannot be exceeded in terms of the international agreement and the UNDOF international forces, which are there to maintain that line. And that is for the protection of the Israeli civilians.
Thank you. Danny on X asks, in Lebanon, I heard that Christians and Druze groups were opposed to Iran-backed Hezbollah, but in Syria, the same groups supported Iran-backed Assad. What's going on with that? What will happen to those minorities now in Lebanon and Syria?
So this is a very good question. In general, minorities tend to stick to those who can actually protect them, in a manner of speaking, almost without a kind of a different route, a different opportunity. The Druze and other groups were actually leaning upon the Assad regime, not because they supported the Assad regime, but because they had no ability to protect themselves against invasions, against jihadists, and so on. In Lebanon, it was a little bit different because there was the Hezbollah that was against the Christians and against the Druze, and they co-opted together with the Palestinians at the time in order to really embark on a battle against the Christians and against the Druze. So that's what happens usually according to the circumstances. Now, the rebels are saying, at least declaratively, that they will protect all the minorities in Syria, that Syria is united for all the minorities, etc., and all of the Syrians will be freed together. We'll have to wait and see what will reality bring forward.
Our next question is from Instagram. What can you tell us about Assad now? Did his plane crash? What happens next?
Well, I cannot tell you for sure, but there are rising suspicions that the plane upon which Assad and his son and some of his assistants embarked upon in order to escape as the rebels were entering Damascus crashed. There is no final declaration concerning this crash, but there are high probabilities that Assad actually is in fact dead. Again, this is not consistent with 100% truth, but these are the probabilities.
Thank you. This is our final question. Michael on YouTube Live asks, Israel announced that its troops are still destroying Hezbollah's weapons in Lebanon. How will the fall of Assad affect Israel's operations in Lebanon?
So this is very complicated. On the one hand, Assad and the Iranian Islamic Republic and regime were together along with the Hezbollah. Now, what had happened throughout the last years was that the Islamic Republic of Iran was smuggling weapons via Assad and Syrian territory to the Hezbollah. Now that will stop because Assad is gone. The Iranians are not going to smuggle anything via Syrian territory to the Hezbollah because they no longer have that stronghold, which means that the Hezbollah's weapons are going to stop coming. Destroying the remainder of the weapons that they already have in Lebanon will actually deplete their weapons and their stocks and make the Hezbollah that is already weakened significantly even more weak. However, we need to continue to see what will happen because the rebels, some of whom are really jihadi Islamists and radicals, have the border open from Syria to Iraq and the border from Syria to Jordan. Now, we need to watch very carefully how everything plays out in Iraq and in Jordan, particularly in Jordan, because we don't want a kind of instigation of a Jordanian similar revolution with jihadis coming to power in Jordan itself, which has a very long border with Israel. So we need to keep our eyes open as to the developments at the moment.
Sorry, we have
Another question? Do we have more questions from the audience?
one additional final question. Benny Lewis on YouTube asks, why isn't Russia more supportive of Israel considering Hamas holds so many Russian captives?
Well, Russia is first and foremost having many interests, strategic interests in Syria, particularly in the port cities right by the sea, in Latakia and other places that were a stronghold of the Assad regime, the Alawite regime. However, because in recent years it is bogged down with its war in Ukraine, it decided that finally, in the last days, the Assad regime became more of a liability rather than an asset, and actually moved out and left the Assad regime, which is one of the reasons why the Assad regime actually collapsed. Why is it not supporting Israel? Well, Russia is largely against the West and the United States. It sees itself as a potential world leader as opposed to the United States. And Israel traditionally is with the United States, also supporting in a manner of speaking, not officially, not declaratively, and not de facto with the army, but in essence, in ethics, the Ukrainian effort. And that's why Russia was on the Iranian side, the Assad side, and the Hezbollah side, mainly also because not only its strategic assets in Syria, but also it was dependent on the Iranian support vis-a-vis Ukraine. And the UAVs that Iran and the Islamic Republic of Iran was providing Russia. And this was all against the Israeli interest and Iran's war against Israel. So just to mention that puts you in a manner of speaking of a black and a white world, but no, dynamics change. When we see the change in Syria, perhaps interests will change as well. And we need to focus and watch all of those role players and see what comes to pass in the next days and weeks. And now, after all these questions, I want to thank all of you and to wish to see you all again tomorrow at 3 p.m. Israel time, live here with us. Thank you.